Hi, welcome to the third part of Decrypting Central Bank Digital Currency webinar series. Today, we will be talking about alternatives to CBDCs. We will be mentioning some examples of policy-related measures or technologies that might actually fit much better than a full-fledged CBDC. So if you're interested about having a more skeptical but sometimes realistic point of view whether or not to use CBDC, then this webinar is for you.
Hello everyone to the third chapter of the Decrypting Central Bank Digital Currencies webinar series. And today we'll be talking about alternatives to central bank digital currencies. Guys, are you ready? Great.
Of course.
Okay, so first question goes to both of you. And well, today we'll be talking about alternatives. And I wonder why so many central banks today are skeptical about implementation of CBDCs. What is the reason, or maybe the number of reasons? Can we elaborate about this? And can you give us some examples?
Especially recently, I will say that September, October, they were, there were a lot of news from the central banks, many of them pointing the position of the central banks, and many of them, they were skeptical, as you mentioned, yeah? So yeah, I can, for example, present the position of the Bank of Canada. They published at the beginning of October a short paper. I think that we can put the link to the paper on the website on our website, that all of you can go there and read this, especially that it is not very long. It's like I think 4 or 5 pages, and they they look at the risks, key risk, why they are skeptical. So they they continue with the research, but what they see, they were like 4 main risks associated with issuing CBDC. And they are, they are related with, how the balances could be aggregated and stored for the CBDCs, how the CBDCs will be used in generally as a transaction within the transaction, and how the participants, within the whole value chain will compete with each other to gain the users. So some of those risks, they are more related to the technology. Some of them, they are more related to the economics of the CBDCs. What I like with the position of the central bank, that they only they didn't only highlighted the risk, but they also provide some mitigation, potential mitigation. So some of the alternatives or some of the plans how those risks could be addressed or mitigated is the limitation of the balances or limitation of the transaction, which will be done by using CBDCs. Another one, the really big topic is, how the liabilities could be changed comparing to the current financial and monetary system, the current currencies, the fiat currencies. And this is, I think, the really, big topic, how the rules related to liabilities could be potentially changed, and into which way, into which direction. And the last one, as far as I remember, will be the, what they can force, what central bank can force in terms of the security protocols to really make the storage of the central bank digital currency safer, more secure. So this is related to this risk related to the, storage, aggregation and storage, because it will be done in some scenarios by other participants of the ecosystem, not central bank themselves. I don't know, Maciej, any other examples you would like to bring? I can share some more, but maybe I will give you voice.
Thanks, Karolina. I think a good dose, a healthy dose of skepticism is always very useful, especially when it comes to topics which are full of hype and media attention. So I think this question is absolutely important to start our conversation today. And apart from what you mentioned, Karolina, there are also two other opposing positions that I have found during my research regarding all of the opposite opinions expressed by different participants in the financial system. One comes obviously from the banking sector, which is concerned by the fact that CBDCs might introduce a possibility of skipping them in the process of issuing money and holding deposits, and obviously proposing credits. That is the case of a recent report which has been released by Deutsche Bank, which apart from that obvious argument, which poses a complete threat not only to them, but also to the entire banking system, they also, I mean, the report also mentions challenges related to the overall scalability of proposed architectures. And I think we will be talking about these in detail later on. But I, as a technologist, I completely agree that the choice of technology is going to be one of the crucial points, or one of the crucial challenges, especially when it comes to interoperability between national payment systems implementing CBDCs in one country and another. Deutsche Bank also mentions political and societal issues. They focus on aspects of privacy and the fact that CBDC falling into wrong hands might actually end up as a tool for the social control, because of the capability of tracking and tracing all of the payments and payment behaviors made by individuals and businesses. Another important voice comes from central banks. You mentioned Bank of Canada. Another very notable example comes from Australia. Maybe it's just a coincidence that Anglo-Saxons are quite skeptical about CBDCs. What is very interesting is that they take a very pragmatic approach, saying that instead of trying to push the CBDC agenda, it actually is much cheaper and more, I would say, cost-effective and results-effective if existing payment systems are simply modernized to make sure that these satisfy all of the ongoing customer requirements, such as real-time settlement of transactions, 24/7 payments that are basically available during the entire day. And they basically found that for the specific case of Australia, there is still a need to search for an appropriate use case, because instant payments is actually not the one that might be applicable to this country. Mm-hmm. So hopefully this fulfills the overall discussion about current voices coming from different countries expressing skepticism regarding CBDCs.
Guys, all those arguments that you have referred supporting the skepticism of central banks towards CBDCs are quite reasonable. Therefore, I wonder whether CBDCs are inevitable future. Can we imagine the world without CBDCs in long term? Maciej, what's your opinion?
This is, again, a very good question. An obvious answer would be it depends. And it really depends on the country and the business, societal, or the political context in which a particular flavor of CBDC is being considered. There are a couple of characteristics whereby CBDCs might find themselves being quite useful, but also a couple of examples whereby, I mean, their use should be reconsidered again. An obvious an obvious situation is an existence of technology that especially among financial infrastructure of developed countries. And this is being coped in a different set of ways. As I said, Australia is choosing to modernize an existing system instead of introducing a quite risky CBDC. Another, let's say, example comes from developing countries, whereby one might think that CBDCs might also be useful in the countries where financial infrastructure is not well developed. But we see examples of countries like Poland, for example, where there are already pre-existing payment systems allowing citizens, organizations, individuals to have to execute instant payments 24/7. The system's name is called BLIK. It has been introduced a couple of years ago. It works pretty well, and people are pretty satisfied by it. So then the question is, why should developing countries introduce CBDCs if there are already existing solutions that are built absolutely from scratch? There are obviously some societal risks, and I mentioned a recent report from Deutsche Bank pointing to that aspect, especially with regards to privacy and societal control. And that strictly depends on political circumstances and political climate in a different country. There are some concerns of coming from countries, for example, like China, where, as probably everyone knows, a DSAP CBDC flavor is now being introduced in a number of Chinese cantons. And well, there is an obvious concern that the Chinese government might actually use this system to effectively track and trace all of the transactions made by individuals exchanging tokens representing digital yuan between themselves. So this is another reason why CBDCs might not actually be applicable in certain countries where privacy protection is particularly strong. And I think of Europe in the first place. Mm-hmm. There is, before thinking about introducing CBDCs, it's also important to have a very good understanding where commercial banks will be placed in the context of that future infrastructure. Banks have reason to be concerned because technically speaking, CBDC might allow central banks to interact directly with citizens and businesses in a given country. So it is absolutely important that regulations, some policies coming from both the regulator and the government provide a clarity as to what the role of commercial banks might be when a particular flavor of CBDC is going to be introduced. And last but not least, I mentioned technical scalability issues. There is actually no evidence of the effectiveness of CBDC until now. There are some studies, some POCs coming here and there with a couple of countries, but no authoritative reports saying that a particular implementation actually brought any benefit or was economically more viable than the other. So maybe our perception of which technology should be used for CBDC is wrong. And obviously what I think, what comes in my mind is the use of DLTs and blockchains as an infrastructure, a foundation for CBDCs. Maybe CBDCs might be implemented on a more centralistic infrastructure where the control is held by a number of institutional organizations which basically trust each other. There are also some options for hybrids. I had a very good conversation with one of my colleagues who gave me an idea that QLDBs, so the hybrids of central databases with blockchain capabilities, might actually be of a good use for CBDCs because they bring the best of the two worlds, the protection known from DLTs and the flexibility and capability and transactional capacity of central databases. So CBDCs might not be an inevitable future. They are possible, but probably not in a way or in the context or in form of use cases that we might think about right now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Maciej. As we can see, CBDCs, we can imagine the world without this phenomenon, but because our webinar today is dedicated to alternatives to CBDCs, let's focus on this area. Karolina, what are the alternatives actually?
What are the alternatives for CBDC? So I will start with playing a little bit with the question, what are the alternatives for CBDCs, like the central bank issue currency, digital currencies, and maybe private digital currencies. This is one alternative, yeah? Mm-hmm. So digital currencies could be issued by central bank, and they could be issued privately, like we could see many cryptocurrencies, for example. So this is one alternative. And I think that one reason why central banks are working, and even those who are skeptical, skeptical about the implementation, all of them, they are doing the research. So I think one of the motivation why they are doing this is this alternative, private digital currencies, which could get, massive adoption on the global scale or nationwide, for example. But I think that probably we will jump a little bit into the alternatives for central banks. What other alternatives central banks have? If they will not implement central bank digital currencies. So this is another perspective of those, alternatives. And I think that, even Maciej mentioned, giving the Australian example, that, the CBDCs, they are not just, technological innovation, but they try to address some of the challenges in the current payment market. We discussed this, I think, in our first webinar, the challenges. So I don't want to repeat, all of them. And, the reason why the banks are doing the research, on top of this motivation that maybe some private companies can introduce the similar tool to the market, is that, that current payment system is not effective. And what I see, like with the many of the central banks, Australian one is a good example, but the same is with the Fed, for example, that they continue with the research. Right now, they started to work on the research even with MIT on some hypothetical digital currencies, where they want really to do the stress test on the technical limitation. But, their main goal is really not to implement, at least this is what they are claiming right now, but they want to bring their system, like the Fed now, to be ready for the real-time cheap, real-time payments. And they want to, I think that they are planning to have this into about 3 years, to 23, 24, 2024, 24. More or less like this. In Europe, we have a little bit better situation, but still for the cross-border payments, I think this is the challenge. The main challenge is that the payments, the transfer are expensive. It takes a lot of time to do this. It's a valid, yeah? It's costly and timely. And with the, central bank digital currencies, we can fix this, but Also, maybe we could fix this leveraging the current infrastructure, because many banks, even if they have infrastructure, like for example in Poland, they limit the usage of this, or they put the, you know, all these interchange fees we have on the, you know, global scale, national scale. You know, we know that there is still, you know, the place for the optimization in this space. I think it's, you know, it's the alternatives. First of all, they will be for the central banks. It will be mainly based on the, you know, improvements of the current infrastructure, current systems we have, making them available really, you know, 24 hours, you know, working over the weekends for the cross-border payments, real time, and, you know, decreasing the fees for the payments at both, you know, global and local scale. Yeah, and I think that I will stop this. And even, you know, looking at the what's happening around the CBDCs, I see this as a pattern that, you know, with the research, many central banks are deeply involved with many POCs, but in the parallel, they speed up with the improvements of current infrastructure. And we know that the future will be, you know, maybe not totally cashless. I don't want us to be totally free from cash, but that, you know, the more and more transaction will be done electronically in the digital way.
Thank you, Karolina. So we can say that on the one hand, central banks have specific aims or challenges to achieve, and on the other, variety of different options to achieve those aims or different solutions that might help them to achieve. And how can we make sure or actually how central banks can make sure that they would select a right solution that will be optimal for achieving certain aim? Maciej.
I think that what you're asking me is which solution not to choose in order not to overkill the entire project and an idea of implementation. I would say that this question goes rather in this direction.
Yeah.
I think that there's a plethora of options available at this moment. It's 2020. It's been a couple of years that allowed everyone to have their voice about how they would like to deal with an introduction of CBDC. There's been a number of considerable studies and extended POCs in a number of countries. So I would say that the very first thing that central banks, in my opinion, should do is to basically learn from these experiences. Just to give a couple of examples of completed projects and studies with some practical effects. Project Ubin in Singapore, financed by the Monetary Authority of Singapore, and which is already like 3 years old, was one of the foundational studies regarding the use of CBDCs in a given country. And I believe that the documentation that has been created out of it is still quite valid, together with the conclusions which have been made during that study. There are also ongoing extensive tests of CBDCs in Cambodia, in China with DSEP, as I mentioned earlier. And they bring ongoing results that are already available to the wider public. So I believe that central banks might take these as potential evidence for not making some of the mistakes that the early adopters have made. Apart from that, and as I said, there are already existing extensive reports which aggregate information coming from different countries and experiences from different central banks. WEF and Bank of International Settlements are two cardinal examples of institutions which are taking a tremendous focus on in order to find out what is going on with regards to the ongoing research and testing of CBDCs, and they make conclusions in form of continuous reports being published on a frequent basis. And well, other things that I would personally recommend to central banks before, let's say, taking any steps into the world of CBDCs is to create their own technical and R&D competencies. It's absolutely crucial that such an innovative and quite risky topic is being studied by your own staff, by the people who are inside of your organization and who actually understand the nature of central banks, the role, their mission, and responsibilities. And as we can see, there are already structured research teams available and working extensively on a number of studies in Japan and in the USA. There are already some teams that are testing different solutions on their own. An example of that is Bank of Lithuania with an LB coin project that has recently been released to the wider public, and which I personally recommend to follow, because it is one of cardinal examples as to how to test an idea of a digital money without entering into some really complex regulatory fields, and without making or ending up with a rollout at a national level. And last but not least, there's still a possibility to modernize what's already in place. I mentioned Bank of Australia that is extending working hours and the settlement frequency of transactions. But we also see that SWIFT and European Central Bank are doing exactly the same. ECB has announced that it's modernizing Target 2 system for the real-time gross settlement systems, and SWIFT has recently introduced a GPI system that is targeting cross-border instant payments. So overall, I believe that these should be the steps taken before making any commitment to go into a full-fledged project related to CBDC, or before making a decision whether or not CBDC is a right choice for a given country.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Maciej. I think we are approaching to the end of our discussion and our webinar. Are there any questions from our participants? I see that we have no question.
There is a question from Lily C. Let us read it.
Yeah, there was a talk on CBDC at the IMF event. During the event, Mr. Carsten mentioned that CBDC will be permissioned and regulated by each nation, which gives the nation to track and control transaction. Isn't CBDC in contract with the blockchain whole idea of being borderless, permissionless? So, Lily, I think this is, first of all, a good question. What are the main fundamentals, behind the CBDCs, and not behind the the digital currencies in general, but CBDCs? That first of all, if we talk about CBDCs, they are central bank digital currencies. So probably central banks will be responsible for the, all the rules, how they want to use and how they want to make this digital currencies available. And I haven't heard from any central bank, to be honest, that they want to make this that they are, in 100% sure that they want to implement this as permissionless. as a central bank position, because here we're talking about the central bank digital currencies. If you will jump into the discussion about digital currencies in general, what are the options? What are the what are the options? Yeah, so one of them will be the global, probably the globally adopted digital currencies, which could be permissionless. And but this is the different discussion. This is not the central bank issued digital currency, but some another let's say entity, or some. It's hard to say even. We see how the cryptocurrencies are driven. What is behind this, and some of them they have wider adoption, some of them they have very small adoption. So it's also showing the nation. Some of them are used as a method to transfer, exchange of value. Some of them they are more used as a investment tool. Yeah, so also the usage of them is different. So I think that here, unfortunately, I think that this is very proper. I see this as a I don't know, Maciej, if you can, or Paweł, if you can add something, but it could be possible that in case blockchain will be chosen as a technology, because also from the technical perspective, maybe there are more options than blockchain. Yeah, let's make it clear. That's not only blockchain is the only answer for issuing the central bank digital currency. This is one of the options, but probably I would assume that central banks will go with kind of the somehow permission solution to address their goal and to protect the national government financial policies.
Karolina, can I add something to what you just said? I think there was a noise. Someone is. Can you please mute everyone? Okay, thank you. So first of all, Karolina said a very important thing in the end of a response. There is a common misconception about CBDC being necessarily implemented with DLTs. This does not have to be the case. And from the perspective of the use case, the cardinal use case behind CBDC, which is basically an issuance of digital money by a central bank that holds a monopoly on money issuance, blockchain might actually not be a primary choice for the future infrastructure, for the future foundation of a given CBDC. So it obviously depends on the mission statement of the Central Bank of Mexico, but I believe that it's probably similar to every single central bank around the world, which is a full responsibility over money issuance and financial stability of a nation. And that includes tracking and controlling transactions. So I believe that when the governance of central banks are saying that they need to have tools and means to track and control transactions, this does not have to necessarily mean that they will scrutinize every single transaction and start to collect information about the individual behaviors of individuals and organizations transacting with each other. This might obviously be very tempting for certain governments, but let's be naive and optimistic that this is not going to be the case. Central banks are already tracking and controlling transactions. They do it on an ongoing basis by aggregating information about what is happening with the money which is already issued and circulating in the economy. And CBDCs are possibly better tools to execute these statutory tasks, something that central banks are already responsible to execute. So this is something that I just wanted to add, is that it is quite probable that DLTs are not going to be the primary choice for CBDCs, and therefore the contrast which you mentioned might actually not find itself or not materialize itself in reality. And secondly, I would be very, let's say, optimistic or careful about interpretation of certain things that governors of central banks are saying, because this doesn't have to necessarily mean what we believe that might mean in its potential, regardless of the capabilities of the technology that we are all aware of, and which, if fallen into wrong hands, might actually give them powerful tools for the social control, which I completely agree with you.
Thank you, Maciej. I think we have no more questions. Thank you guys for this inspiring discussion about alternatives to CBDCs.
Our series, it's only 5 webinars, so 2 more to go. And we would like to welcome you for the November 4th, the same time as usual. I think we will stay with Zoom as it works better than YouTube. We explore also different technologies, how to deliver this, and we will be exploring, the CBDC adoption patterns next time. So I hope to see all of you with us next time. Take care, stay safe, test negative.